Granville, Ohio was the kind of town where everyone knew their neighbors, where the seasons changed with graceful predictability, and where life moved at its own unhurried pace. The shopping mall at the edge of town was no different, a modest two-story building with warm lighting, potted plants in every corner, and storefronts that had barely changed in 20 years. It was here, amid the gentle hum of conversation and the soft music playing overhead, that Brindle first appeared. Nobody knew where he came from. One Wednesday morning he simply walked through the automatic doors as if he had every right to be there, a slender cat with marbled grey and ivory stripes and eyes the colour of polished amber. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly where they belong, even if no one else does. Clarice Peterson, owner of Petals and Memories florist shop near the east entrance, was the first to notice him. She had been arranging lavender sprigs when a shadow crossed her display window. Looking up, she saw the cat sitting outside, watching her with an intensity that made her pause. "Well, hello there," she said, stepping outside. "Are you lost, little one?" The cat didn't approach or retreat. He simply blinked once, slowly, before standing and walking away with measured steps. Clarice expected that would be the end of it. Strays sometimes wandered in from the nearby woods, only to disappear again. But the following Wednesday, at precisely 9 in the morning, the cat returned. He sat in the same spot, watching her arrange flowers with the same focused attention. "You're back," Clarice smiled. This time she had prepared a small bowl of water. She placed it a respectful distance away. The cat regarded it but made no move to drink. After exactly 30 minutes, he stood, stretched, and departed. And so began a pattern. Every Wednesday the cat would arrive, observe, and leave. Clarice started calling him Brindle because of his striped coat. The name stuck. "He's not like other strays," she told Martha from the bookshop across the hall. "He doesn't beg for food or try to get inside, he just watches." "Maybe he's someone's pet that got out," Martha suggested. "No collar. And besides, what kind of owner lets their cat out the same time every week?" Clarice shook her head. "There's something different about this one." What neither woman knew was that Brindle wasn't watching Clarice at all. His attention was fixed beyond her, through the large windows, to the east wing escalator. His eyes followed its moving steps with unwavering focus, as if waiting for something only he could see. By the third week, other shop owners began to notice him too. Harold from the hardware store claimed the cat had been inspecting the mall's electrical room door. Samantha at the coffee kiosk swore she saw him testing the emergency exit with his paw. Some dismissed these stories as exaggerations, but others weren't so sure. "That cat's got purpose," said George Williams, the elderly security guard who had worked at the mall since it opened. "Animals know things we don't." Few paid attention to George's musings. In a small town like Granville, even the smallest novelties became topics of conversation before fading into the background of everyday life. Soon, Brindle became just another quirk of the mall, the Wednesday cat who bothered no one and caused no trouble. But Clarice noticed something no one else did. Each week, Brindle spent more time near the east escalator. Sometimes he would sit for hours, watching people ascend and descend, his tail twitching occasionally as if counting each passenger. Once, she even saw him place a tentative paw on the bottom step before quickly withdrawing it. "What are you looking for?" she whispered one day, kneeling beside him. Brindle turned to her, and for a brief moment Clarice could have sworn she saw something in those golden eyes. Not animal instinct, but understanding. It was a Wednesday in early autumn when everything changed. The mall was preparing for its modest fall decoration display. Maintenance workers were hanging plastic maple leaves from the ceiling, and the scent of cinnamon from Martha's bookstore cafe filled the air. Brindle arrived at his usual time, but instead of sitting near Clarice's shop, he walked directly to the east escalator and stationed himself at the bottom step. Clarice watched from her doorway, puzzled by the change in routine. She wasn't the only one watching. George had noticed too, and was making his way toward the cat, walkie-talkie in hand. "Can't have animals on the equipment," he muttered as he passed Clarice. Health code violation. But before George could reach him, Brindle did something he had never done before. He stepped onto the escalator and rode it halfway up. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he simply sat down, blocking the path. People behind him stopped, unsure how to proceed. A teenager wearing headphones nearly tripped trying to avoid stepping on the cat. An older man grumbled about vermin in public places. George quickened his pace, already rehearsing how he would safely remove the animal without causing a scene. None of them realized that this unusual behavior was about to save a life. At that exact moment, Nadine Harlow and her grandson Kellen were approaching the escalator from the food court. Nadine's silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her gentle eyes crinkled at the corners as she listened to Kellen chattering about his new notebook. "And Mrs. Wilson said we can put stickers on it if we want," the 7-year-old explained, carefully peeling a cat sticker from its backing. His small hands trembled slightly as he placed it on the cover, a side effect of the neurological condition he had been born with. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Nadine replied, adjusting the strap on Kellen's special walker. The device, with its adapted wheels and supportive frame, allowed the boy independence despite his coordination difficulties. "You're my favorite gift. Do you know that?" she added softly. Kellen looked up at her with his slightly crooked smile, the one that made Nadine's heart feel too big for her chest. "Better than Christmas presents. Better than all the presents in the world," she assured him, gently guiding him toward the escalator. They were just steps away when they noticed the commotion. People were backing up, creating a small crowd at the base of the moving stairs. And there in the middle of it all sat Brindle, perfectly still, golden eyes fixed directly on them. "Grandma, look! A kitty!" Kellen exclaimed, his face lighting up. Nadine squinted, trying to understand what was happening. She saw George approaching, saw the impatient faces of delayed shoppers. Common sense told her to wait for the next escalator or take the elevator, but something about the cat's unwavering gaze made her pause. "Let's wait a moment, sweetheart," she said to Kellen, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. And in that moment of hesitation, that pause inspired by a cat who refused to move, everything changed. What would happen next would leave the entire town of Granville wondering, was it mere coincidence? Or did this ordinary stray somehow know exactly what he was doing? The growing crowd at the base of the escalator was becoming restless. Shopping bags knocked against legs, impatient sighs filled the air, and George was now just a few steps away from reaching Brindle, who remained perfectly motionless halfway up the moving stairs. "Ma'am, I'd recommend using the West Wing elevator," George called to Nadine, noticing her and Kellen waiting at the edge of the gathering. "We seem to have a situation here." But Nadine found herself unable to move away. There was something about the cat's posture, alert yet calm, focused yet still, that resonated with her. After 40 years as an elementary school librarian before retirement, she had developed what her daughter called an intuition radar. Right now, it was sending strong signals. "Kitty's not moving, Grandma," Kellen observed, his fingers tightening around the handles of his walker. "No, he's not, sweetie," Nadine agreed, watching as George carefully climbed toward the cat. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as the strangest thing. As George reached for Brindle, the cat finally moved, not to run away, but to stand and walk deliberately down several steps. Then he stopped again, looking directly at the top of the escalator, where the metal plates met the floor of the upper level. Following the cat's gaze, George noticed something he hadn't seen before, a strange shadow at the landing point, a slight irregularity in the usually smooth transition. Frowning, he pulled out a small flashlight from his belt and directed its beam toward the area. "Hold up, everyone," he called out, his voice suddenly taking on an official tone. "Nobody get on or off until I check something." Leaning forward carefully, George examined the meeting point between the escalator and the upper floor. His frown deepened as he discovered what Brindle seemed to have been alerting them to all along. A significant crack had formed in the metal plate, creating a gap just wide enough to catch a shoe, a cane, or the wheels of a child's walker. "I need maintenance at the east escalator immediately," George spoke urgently into his walkie-talkie. "We've got a structural hazard. Repeat, structural hazard at the east escalator landing." The mall's chief engineer, Dave Morales, arrived within minutes. After a quick inspection, his face turned grave. "Shut it down now," he ordered. "The support bracket underneath has failed. This whole section could collapse under pressure." As the escalator ground to a halt and security began redirecting shoppers, Nadine felt a chill run through her body. She looked down at Kellen's walker, with its narrow wheels that would have rolled directly into that damaged section, and then at Brindle, who was now sitting calmly at the bottom of the stationary stairs. "Grandma, why is everyone looking at the kitty?" Kellen asked, sensing the change in atmosphere. Nadine knelt beside her grandson, finding it difficult to form words around the lump in her throat. Sometimes, sweetheart, help comes from unexpected places. Later that afternoon, as mall maintenance crews worked to repair the dangerous defect, Nadine sat with Kellen in the food court, both enjoying ice cream cones. Her hands still trembled slightly when she thought about what might have happened. The engineers had been clear. The damaged plate could have given way under the specific pressure of narrow wheels, potentially causing a serious accident. "I'd like to find that cat," she told Clarice, who had joined them after closing her flower shop early. To thank him, as silly as that sounds. "Not silly at all," Clarice replied, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "Brindle's been watching that escalator for weeks now, almost like he knew." "Brindle? You've named him. He shows up every Wednesday morning like clockwork. Never begs, never makes trouble, just observes." Nadine watched as Kellen carefully licked his ice cream, his movements deliberate and concentrated. Since her daughter had moved to Seattle for her new job as a software engineer, Nadine had become more than a grandmother to Kellen. Their bond had deepened into something precious and vital. They were each other's daily sunshine. The thought of what could have happened, of Kellen's walker catching in that gap, of him falling, made her hands shake again. She set down her ice cream cone before she could drop it. "Are you okay, Grandma?" Kellen asked, noticing her distress with the perceptiveness that often surprised adults around him. "Yes, darling, just thinking about how special today is," she answered, managing a smile. "Because we met a hero kitty." Exactly that. By evening, word of the incident had spread throughout Granville. The local newspaper editor, always eager for stories in the quiet town, had already called Nadine for an interview. Mall management issued a statement thanking their vigilant maintenance program for averting a potential accident, conveniently omitting any mention of a cat's involvement. But Nadine knew better. So did Clarice, George, and everyone else who had witnessed Brindle's strange behavior. That night, as Nadine tucked Kellen into bed, the boy asked a question that had clearly been on his mind. "Grandma, how did the kitty know the stairs were broken?" Nadine smoothed his hair, considering her answer carefully. "Some things in this world don't need explanations, sweetheart. Sometimes the miracle is simply that the right helper appears exactly when we need them." Kellen seemed to accept this, his eyelids growing heavy. "Can we look for Brindle tomorrow? I want to thank him." "We'll try," Nadine promised, kissing his forehead. "Now sleep tight." After Kellen drifted off, Nadine sat in her rocking chair by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The evening news played softly on the television, reporting on the mall incident as a narrowly averted accident. She turned it off, preferring the silence and her own thoughts. Tomorrow, she decided, she would go back to the mall. She would bring a proper offering for Brindle, not just food and water, but acknowledgement. Because, whether by coincidence, instinct, or something more profound, that cat had prevented what could have been a tragedy. As she finally prepared for bed, Nadine couldn't shake the memory of those golden eyes, so focused and knowing. In her 72 years, she had seen many strange and wonderful things, but never had she felt so certain that there was more to an animal than met the eye. Outside her window, under the silver glow of the moon, a shadow moved across her garden. A slender cat with marbled grey and ivory stripes paused by her rose bushes, amber eyes gleaming in the darkness. For a moment, it seemed to look directly toward Kellen's bedroom window before continuing on its silent patrol through the sleeping neighborhood. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed midnight, marking the end of a day that could have ended very differently, and the beginning of a mystery that would soon capture the imagination of everyone in Granville. What was it about this ordinary-looking cat that seemed so extraordinary? And why had he chosen that particular moment to break his pattern of silent observation? The answers, though not yet clear, were already setting in motion events that would change many lives, beginning with Nadine and Kellen, whose paths had crossed with Brindle's at precisely the right moment. The morning after the escalator incident dawned bright and clear, the kind of autumn day that painted Granville in shades of gold and amber. Nadine woke early, her mind already filled with plans. She prepared a special breakfast of blueberry pancakes, Kellen's favorite, and waited for the sound of his walker in the hallway. When he appeared, still in his spaceship pajamas and with his hair sticking up in all directions, his first words were not about breakfast. "Are we going to find Brindle today, Grandma?" Nadine smiled, helping him into his chair at the kitchen table. Yes, sweetheart. But first, pancakes. Heroes need their strength, even cat heroes. While they ate, Nadine explained her plan. According to Clarice, Brindle appeared most reliably on Wednesday mornings, but had been spotted occasionally near the service entrance at other times. Today, being Saturday, they would need to be strategic. I thought we'd bring him something special, she said, cutting Kellen's pancakes into manageable pieces. Something to show our gratitude. After breakfast, Kellen insisted on creating a gift. With Nadine's help, he cut a small square of white fabric from an old handkerchief. Using fabric markers that Nadine kept for craft projects, he carefully drew a red heart in the center, his tongue peeking out between his teeth as he concentrated. Below the heart, he wrote in trembling letters, "Thank you for stopping us." "Do you think cats can read, Grandma?" he asked seriously, as Nadine helped him fold the makeshift bandana. "I think this particular cat might understand more than we think," she answered, surprising herself with how firmly she believed it. By mid-morning, they were ready to leave. Nadine packed a small tote bag with 2 ceramic bowls, a container of premium cat food she'd purchased on their way home yesterday, fresh water, and Kellen's special gift. Together, they made their way to her elderly but reliable Buick. The mall was busier on Saturdays, filled with families and teenagers enjoying their weekend. As Nadine helped Kellen navigate through the crowded entrance, she noticed something different. People were talking about Brindle. Snippets of conversation floated around them. "They say it just sat there, wouldn't move. Could have been awful if that walker had caught." Security footage shows the cat staring at that exact spot for weeks. Granville, like most small towns, had a communication network more efficient than any social media platform. By now, everyone knew about the cat who had seemingly prevented an accident. Some accounts had already grown exaggerated, claiming Brindle had meowed loudly to alert security or pulled a child back from danger. The truth, as Nadine had witnessed, was both simpler and more mysterious. They made their way to Clarice's flower shop, where the florist greeted them warmly. "I was hoping you'd come by," she said, ushering them inside. The shop smelled of fresh roses and lavender, with sunlight streaming through the display window and catching the mist from the flower sprayers. "Have you seen him today?" Nadine asked, looking around hopefully. Clarice shook her head. "Not yet. But there's something I want to show you." She led them to a small alcove beside her shop, partially hidden behind a large decorative fern. There, in the corner, was a discreet arrangement, a shallow dish with water, a small plate with what looked like premium cat treats, and a sprinkling of dried lavender petals. "I've been leaving these for him since he first started appearing," Clarice explained. "The water gets drunk, but he never touches the food when anyone's watching." "The lavender, though," she smiled. "He seems to like it. Sometimes I find him just sitting here, breathing it in." Kellen leaned on his walker, peering at the little shrine with fascination. "Can we leave our gifts here too?" "That's a perfect idea," Clarice agreed. "In fact, why don't we make it a bit nicer?" Together they rearranged the alcove, creating a more comfortable space. Clarice contributed a small, soft cushion that had been used in a window display. Nadine added their ceramic bowls, one filled with fresh water, the other with the premium cat food. Kellen carefully placed his handmade bandana on the cushion. "Now we wait," he asked, looking up at the adults. "Now we wait," Nadine confirmed. "But maybe not right here. Brindle might be shy about coming if we're all watching." Clarice suggested they visit the bookstore cafe across the hall, which offered a perfect view of the alcove without being too obvious. As they settled at a table with hot chocolate for Kellen and tea for the adults, Nadine noticed George, the security guard, making his rounds. "I hear you're looking for our little hero," he said, stopping at their table. "Any sign of him today?" Nadine asked. George shook his head. "Not yet, but I've been reviewing the security footage from the past few weeks." He lowered his voice, leaning in slightly. "It's the strangest thing. That cat has been examining that escalator for almost a month, always the same spot. Could he have seen the damage somehow?" Nadine wondered. "That's just it. According to the engineers, the crack was internal at first, only became visible yesterday when the supporting bracket finally gave way." George scratched his grey stubbled chin, almost like he knew it was going to happen before it did. "Cats have heightened senses," Clarice offered. "Maybe he felt vibrations or heard something we couldn't." "Maybe," George agreed, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. Anyway, management's trying to keep it quiet. Don't want people thinking they neglected maintenance checks. But they're fixing it properly now, Nadine asked, glancing toward Kellen, who was happily drawing on a napkin, oblivious to the adult conversation. Oh yes, they've got a specialist team in. I won't reopen until it's certified safe. George's radio crackled, calling him to another area. Keep me posted if you spot our friend, he said before heading off. For the next hour, they watched the alcove while pretending not to watch it. Kellen grew restless, so Nadine took him to the children's section of the bookstore, where they read several picture books together. When they returned to the cafe for lunch, Clarice was waiting with an excited expression. He was here, she whispered. Just for a moment, but he definitely came. They hurried back to the alcove. The water level in the bowl had dropped, and there were a few cat hairs on the cushion. But most surprising was Kellen's handmade bandana. It had been moved, now perfectly centered on the cushion as if deliberately placed. He read my note, Kellen breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. Nadine felt a chill run up her spine, not unpleasant, but certainly uncanny. She was a practical woman who had never been given to flights of fancy, yet here she was standing in a mall, feeling absolute certainty that a stray cat had understood her grandson's message. Let's come back on Wednesday, Clarice suggested. He's always here on Wednesdays. As they prepared to leave, Nadine noticed something she hadn't before, a small bulletin board near the mall entrance with community announcements. Among the flyers for local events and lost pets was a freshly printed notice. Granville Library seeking volunteer readers for Children's Sunday program. It had been years since Nadine had read to children in an official capacity. After retiring from her school librarian position, she had filled her time with gardening and caring for Kellen. But seeing that notice stirred something in her, a reminder of how much joy she had found in sharing stories with young minds. "What do you think, Kellen?" she asked, pointing to the flyer. "Should Grandma volunteer at the library?" Kellen's face lit up. "Yes, you do the best voices. All the kids will love it." Decision made, Nadine took down the contact information. As they walked back to the car, Kellen chattering about which books she should read to the children, Nadine felt a strange sense of rightness, as if pieces were falling into place in a puzzle she hadn't realized she was solving. That evening, as she called the library to offer her services, she couldn't help but wonder, if not for Brindle's intervention yesterday, would she have ever seen that flyer? Would she have found her way back to something she loved? For the first time, she considered that perhaps what happened at the escalator had saved more than just Kellen from physical harm. Perhaps it had also set in motion changes that would enrich their lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. As darkness fell, Nadine stood at her kitchen window looking out at her backyard. For a moment she thought she saw a flash of striped fur by the garden shed, but when she blinked, it was gone, leaving her to wonder if Brindle's influence extended beyond the walls of the shopping mall, and if so, what other changes might lie ahead. Somewhere in the quiet streets of Granville, a cat with golden eyes and a purpose moved silently through the night, leaving no trace except in the lives he touched. And though no one could see him, his work was far from finished. What role would Brindle play in the days to come? And what other secrets did he carry behind those knowing amber eyes? Sunday morning arrived with a gentle rain that pattered against Nadine's bedroom window, creating a soothing rhythm that almost tempted her to remain in bed. But today was important, her first day as a volunteer reader at the Granville Public Library. She rose with purpose, selecting a comfortable floral dress and a cardigan that had been her late husband's favorite. "You look pretty, Grandma," Kellen said when she entered the kitchen, where he was already attempting to pour cereal into a bowl, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. "Thank you, sweetheart," she replied, helping him steady the milk carton. "Are you excited about story time?" Kellen nodded enthusiastically. "Do you think Brindle might come? Since we'll be reading stories about cats." Nadine smiled at his innocent question. "The library doesn't allow pets inside, honey. But who knows? Stranger things have happened this week." The Granville Public Library was a beloved institution, a red brick building with tall windows and wooden shelves that reached toward the ceiling. It smelled of paper, furniture polish, and the distinct scent of well-read books. As a child, Nadine had spent countless hours here, discovering worlds between pages. Later, she had brought her own daughter, Rachel, to story time in this very room. Now, decades later, she was bringing Kellen. Life's circles, she thought, always turning back to the beginning. The children's librarian, Marion Finch, greeted them warmly. In her mid-50s, with prematurely silver hair and bright blue reading glasses perched on her nose, Marion had a reputation for fiercely defending the importance of children's literature. "Nadine Harlow, I was thrilled when you called," she exclaimed. "We've been short-handed since Ms. Abernathy moved to Florida, and with your experience—" She gestured around the children's section, with its colorful bean bags and miniature furniture. "This is perfect." Nadine felt a flutter of nerves as she arranged herself in the reading chair, a throne-like seat with plush cushions that had been in the library since her own childhood. Around her, children began to gather, sitting cross-legged on the rainbow rug. Parents settled in chairs along the perimeter, some already opening magazines or checking phones. Kellen positioned himself proudly in the front row, his walker carefully placed beside him. He gave Nadine an encouraging thumbs up. "Good morning, everyone," Nadine began, her voice finding its old storytelling rhythm. "Today we're going to read about some very special animals who help people in unexpected ways." She opened the first book, The Cat Who Found His Way Home, and began to read. The story of a lost cat finding its family by following the stars resonated differently with her now after meeting Brindle. As she read, showing pictures and changing her voice for different characters, she felt herself slipping back into a role that had once been as natural as breathing. The children were captivated, their faces turned up toward her like flowers seeking sun. Even the parents had set aside their distractions, drawn in by the age-old magic of storytelling. As she finished the first book and reached for the second, something caught Nadine's eye, a movement outside the large window that faced the library's side garden. There, sitting perfectly still on the stone wall, was a familiar grey and ivory striped figure, Brindle. Nadine nearly dropped the book in surprise. The cat was watching her through the glass, golden eyes intent and focused. No one else seemed to notice him. "Grandma," Kellen whispered loudly, pointing. "It's him." Several children turned to look where Kellen was pointing, and excited whispers rippled through the group. "Is that the hero cat from the mall?" one little girl asked, eyes wide. The story of Brindle's intervention at the Escalator had spread throughout Grandville, growing more elaborate with each telling. By now, most children in town had heard some version of it. "Yes," Nadine confirmed, surprised by how steady her voice sounded despite her racing heart. "That's Brindle, and it seems he's come to listen to our stories." What might have been a disruption instead became a magical enhancement to the reading session. Nadine continued with the second book, The Lighthouse Cat, while Brindle remained at his post outside the window, occasionally blinking slowly but never moving away. By the time she closed the third and final book, even the adults were stealing glances at the unusual visitor. Marion approached Nadine as the children began to disperse. "I've never seen anything like it," she marveled. "That cat sat there the entire hour, not moving, just listening." "He's special," Kellen declared with absolute conviction. Marion smiled at him. "So I've heard. The mall incident has become quite the talk of the town." She turned back to Nadine. "Would you be willing to make this a regular thing?" The children were absolutely enchanted, although I can't promise a celebrity cat audience every week. Nadine agreed without hesitation. The joy of reading aloud, of sharing stories and seeing young faces light up with imagination had awakened something in her that had been dormant for too long. After arranging to return the following Sunday, Nadine and Kellen made their way outside. She half expected Brindle to have disappeared, but instead they found him waiting by the garden gate. "Hello, friend," Nadine said softly, kneeling down despite her arthritic knees. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Brindle regarded her steadily, then did something remarkable. He stepped forward and very gently touched his nose to her extended hand. The brief contact felt significant somehow, an acknowledgement between them. "Can I pet him, Grandma?" Kellen asked, his voice hushed with reverence. "Ask him," Nadine suggested. Kellen carefully lowered himself to Brindle's level, balancing against his walker. "May I pet you, please? For saving us at the mall." To their astonishment, Brindle stepped closer to Kellen and bowed his head slightly. The boy's smile was radiant as he gently stroked the cat's silky fur. "He feels warm, like sunshine," Kellen whispered. For several precious minutes they remained like that, a small boy with his walker, an elderly woman with her memories, and a mysterious cat who had somehow connected their lives. Then, as if responding to some silent call, Brindle stepped back, gave them one final look and trotted away around the corner of the library. "Sentinel of silence," Kellen said unexpectedly as they watched him go. "What's that, sweetheart?" Nadine asked. "That's what Brindle is, a sentinel of silence, watching over everyone without making noise." Nadine felt a shiver of recognition at the phrase. For a 7-year-old with language difficulties, Kellen sometimes produced startlingly poetic observations. "That's perfect," she agreed. "Our sentinel of silence." On the drive home, Kellen was unusually quiet, looking thoughtfully out the window at the passing scenery. "Penny for your thoughts," Nadine asked. "Grandma, do you think Brindle belongs to anyone?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken possibility. "I'm not sure," she answered carefully. "He seems very independent." "But everyone needs a home," Kellen persisted, "even sentinels." Nadine thought about her house, too big since Thomas had passed 5 years ago, too quiet when Kellen wasn't visiting. She thought about the empty cushion by the fireplace where Thomas's old retriever had once slept, and how she still sometimes expected to see him there. "You're right," she said finally. "Everyone needs a home." That afternoon, they drove to the pet store and purchased supplies, a proper food bowl, a comfortable bed, high-quality cat food, and even a small collar with a bell. Nadine wasn't entirely sure why she was doing this. Brindle had shown no indication that he wanted to be anyone's pet, yet something told her to prepare, to create space for possibility. As they arranged the new cat bed in the corner of the living room, Kellen carefully placed his handmade bandana inside it. "So he knows it's for him," he explained. That night, after Kellen had gone to bed, Nadine sat in her rocking chair by the window, a book open in her lap. But her attention was drawn repeatedly to the darkness outside, to the garden where shadows moved with the swaying branches. Tomorrow would be Monday. Rachel would call for their weekly check-in, and Nadine would tell her about becoming a library volunteer. She would probably mention Brindle too, though she wasn't sure how to explain something she didn't fully understand herself. As she finally rose to go to bed, she caught a flash of movement on the porch. Opening the curtain wider, she saw Brindle sitting there, looking in at her. Their eyes met through the glass, and Nadine felt that same strange connection, an understanding beyond words. Impulsively, she opened the door. "Would you like to come in?" she asked softly. Brindle considered her for a long moment. Then, with deliberate steps, he walked past her into the house, his tail held high like a banner. He moved directly to the new cat bed, circled it once, and settled himself in, golden eyes blinking slowly at her before closing. Nadine stood there, hardly believing what she was seeing. Whatever had brought this remarkable creature into their lives, whatever strange purpose guided him, it seemed their paths were now firmly intertwined. As she turned out the lights and headed to her bedroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that Brindle's appearance at the mall escalator had set in motion events that would continue to unfold in ways she couldn't yet imagine. What other lives would he touch? What other moments would he transform with his silent, watchful presence? The answers lay ahead, waiting to be discovered, one paw print at a time. Monday morning brought with it the gentle routine Nadine had established since becoming Kellen's primary caregiver. She woke early, prepared breakfast, and laid out his clothes for the day, all tasks that had become second nature over the past year. But today there was a new element to her morning, checking to see if Brindle was still in his bed. To her surprise, he was. The cat was curled up exactly where she had left him the night before, his marbled fur catching the early morning sunlight that streamed through the living room window. At the sound of her footsteps, he opened one golden eye, regarded her calmly, then stretched in that particular way cats do, extending each limb deliberately before settling back into a comfortable position. "Well, good morning to you too," Nadine said, smiling despite herself. In the kitchen, as she mixed pancake batter and heated the griddle, she found herself speaking aloud, explaining her routine as if Brindle could understand every word. "Kellen will be up soon. He likes his pancakes with blueberries arranged in a smiley face. Silly, I know, but traditions matter to him." She paused, spatula in hand, realizing she was talking to a cat as naturally as she would to another person. Perhaps loneliness had affected her more than she'd realized. Since Thomas's passing, and especially since Rachel had moved to Seattle with her job promotion, Nadine's daily conversations had dwindled considerably. The sound of Kellen's walker in the hallway interrupted her thoughts. His sleepy face brightened immediately when he entered the kitchen. "Is Brindle still here?" "Yes, he's—" Nadine began, but Kellen was already making his way toward the living room as quickly as his walker would allow. "He stayed," came the delighted exclamation moments later. "Grandma, he's using the bed we got him." Kellen's joy was infectious, and Nadine found herself smiling as she flipped pancakes. When she brought breakfast to the table, Kellen was already settled in his chair, chattering excitedly. "Can I give him some pancake? Just a tiny piece?" "Let's stick to cat food for now," Nadine suggested, placing the special blueberry smiley face pancake on his plate. "I'm not sure what cats should and shouldn't eat." As if on cue, Brindle appeared in the doorway, moving with that liquid grace that made him seem to flow rather than walk. He settled himself near the table, not begging but simply observing, his tail wrapped neatly around his paws. "I think he likes watching us," Kellen said between bites, "like at the mall and the library." After breakfast, Nadine helped Kellen get ready for his day at Granville Elementary. His special education class was small, just 8 children with various needs, and his teacher, Miss Henderson, was a patient woman who had become a valuable ally in Kellen's development. "Do you think Brindle will be here when I get home?" Kellen asked as Nadine helped him into his jacket. "I don't know, sweetheart. He seems to come and go as he pleases. But he knows this is his home now, right?" The hope in Kellen's voice was unmistakable. Nadine chose her words carefully. "I think Brindle knows he's welcome here. The rest is up to him." After seeing Kellen onto the school bus, Nadine returned to find Brindle sitting by the front window, watching the street with focused attention. She approached him slowly, still uncertain of their boundaries. "You're quite the mystery, aren't you?" she said softly, settling into her rocking chair. "Where did you come from? And what brought you to us?" Brindle turned to look at her, and for a moment Nadine had that unsettling feeling again, that he understood far more than an ordinary cat should. Then he stood, stretched, and moved to the door, looking back at her expectantly. "You want to go out?" A single slow blink seemed to confirm it. "Well, I suppose you're not really a house cat, are you?" Nadine opened the door, watching as Brindle trotted down the steps and across the yard. At the edge of the property he paused, looking back once before disappearing into the bushes that separated her yard from the vacant lot next door. Alone again, Nadine moved through her morning chores with practiced efficiency: laundry, dusting, preparing a casserole for dinner. At 10 o'clock, right on schedule, the phone rang. Rachel's weekly check-in call. "Mom, how are you and Kellen doing?" Nadine settled into her chair, phone to her ear, and considered how to explain the events of the past few days. She started with the simplest part, her new role as a library volunteer, before tentatively broaching the subject of Brindle. "So this cat just knew the escalator was damaged?" Rachel's voice carried that particular tone adult children use when humoring their parents. "And now it's staying at your house?" "He comes and goes," Nadine clarified. "But yes, that's essentially what happened." A pause on the line. "Mum, are you sure this is a good idea, taking in a stray? What if it has diseases or fleas, or—" "He's perfectly clean," Nadine interrupted, surprised by her own defensiveness. "And Kellen adores him." Another pause. "Just be careful, okay? I worry about you two out there alone." The conversation shifted to safer topics: Rachel's work, her new apartment, plans for Thanksgiving. Nadine listened, asking appropriate questions, but part of her mind remained on Brindle and the subtle change his presence had already brought to their home. There was something comforting about sharing the space with another living being, even one who moved on silent paws and kept his secrets close. After the call ended, Nadine gathered her purse and car keys. She had errands to run, groceries, the pharmacy, and now she decided to stop at the veterinarian's office to ask about care for a semi-feral cat. If Brindle was going to be part of their lives, even intermittently, she wanted to do things properly. Dr. Wilson's veterinary practice was a small, homey building near the town square. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and pet shampoo, with framed photos of happy animals covering the walls. The receptionist, Betty, had known Nadine for years, had even cared for Thomas's old retriever, Rusty. Nadine, it's been ages, Betty greeted her. Don't tell me you've got a new pet. Sort of, Nadine explained. It's complicated. I was hoping to ask Dr. Wilson a few questions. Fortunately, it was a slow morning, and the veterinarian was able to see her between appointments. Dr. Wilson, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and practical hands, listened attentively as Nadine described Brindle. His appearance at the mall, his apparent awareness of the escalator defect, his periodic visits, and now his tentative acceptance of their home. And you say he's never aggressive, never shown any signs of illness? Dr. Wilson asked, making notes. He seems perfectly healthy, very clean, good appetite from what I've observed. But he's definitely not an ordinary house cat. Dr. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. Some cats do have a sixth sense about certain things. Changes in barometric pressure, subtle vibrations, even illness in humans. There are documented cases of cats detecting seizures before they happen, or finding their way home from incredible distances. So you don't think I'm imagining things? Nadine asked, relief evident in her voice. I think you experienced something unusual, certainly. Doctor, Wilson smiled, and I think you've been adopted by a very special cat. Let me give you some supplies, flea treatment, deworming medication, the basics. If he'll let you handle him, great. If not, we can arrange for him to come in. Nadine left the office with a small bag of supplies and a sense of validation. She wasn't losing her mind. Something extraordinary had happened and continued to happen with Brindle. On her way home, she drove past the mall and impulsively decided to stop. The east escalator was still cordoned off with yellow caution tape, though a crew of workers was busy dismantling parts of it. She approached slowly, watching their methodical movements. Quite a job they've got, came a familiar voice beside her. George, the security guard, was leaning against a pillar observing the work. They're replacing the entire mechanism. Found more damage once they started looking. Nadine felt a chill. More damage. George nodded grimly. Stress fractures in 3 support beams. Engineers say it was a disaster waiting to happen. He lowered his voice. Between you and me, they're checking all the escalators now. Found similar issues in the West Wing. Not as bad, but still concerning. My God, Nadine whispered, thinking of Kellen's walker, of what could have happened. Your cat friend saved more than just your grandson, George continued. Could have been anyone. Her mother with a stroller, an elderly person with a cane. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the workers. Have you seen him? Brindle? George asked eventually. He's been visiting our house, Nadine admitted. Stayed the night, actually. George smiled. Good. He deserves a comfortable place. He checked his watch. Better continue my rounds. Take care, Mrs. Harlow. As Nadine walked back to her car, she noticed Clarice arranging flowers in her shop window. She waved and the florist beckoned her inside. I'd been hoping you'd stop by, Clarice said, wiping her hands on her apron. Look what I found this morning. She led Nadine to the back of the shop, where a small door opened onto an alley used for deliveries. Just outside, partially hidden behind a stack of empty planters, was a nest-like arrangement of dried lavender sprigs, carefully piled in a perfect circle. I think our friend has been collecting these, Clarice said. I keep finding little piles around the shopping centre, always near exits, always in this circular pattern. Nadine knelt to examine the arrangement. It was too deliberate to be random, too precise to be accidental. Like he's marking safe places, she murmured. Exactly what I thought, Clarice agreed. Safe exits. The 2 women exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing, but hesitant to voice it. What did Brindle know that they didn't? By the time Nadine returned home, the afternoon was fading into evening. She unloaded her groceries, set the table for dinner, and prepared Kellen's homework space, all the while glancing occasionally at the front window, wondering if Brindle would return. The school bus dropped Kellen off at 4:30 as usual. His face was alight with excitement as he maneuvered his walker up the front path. Grandma, Miss Henderson says I can bring pictures of Brindle for show and tell on Friday. Is he home? Nadine helped him up the steps. I haven't seen him since this morning, sweetheart. Remember, he comes and goes as he pleases. Kellen's face fell slightly. But he will come back, right? I believe he will, Nadine assured him, though she wasn't entirely certain herself. They settled into their evening routine. Dinner, homework, bath time, and finally, story time in Kellen's room. Tonight, at his request, Nadine read The Cat Who Saved Christmas, even though it was months away from the holiday. As she read, she couldn't help noticing how Kellen's eyes kept drifting toward his bedroom door, as if expecting a visitor. When the story was finished and Kellen was tucked in, Nadine kissed his forehead. "Sleep tight, my brave boy." "Grandma," he said, catching her hand before she could leave. "I think Brindle is a guardian angel, like in the stories." Nadine paused. "What makes you say that?" "Because he watches over people, and he knows things before they happen." Kellen's voice was serious. "Ms. Henderson says guardian angels come in all forms." Nadine smiled gently. "That's a lovely thought. Now sleep well." Downstairs, she settled into her rocking chair with a cup of tea and her knitting, a sweater for Kellen that she hoped to finish before the weather turned truly cold. The house was quiet, except for the gentle clicking of her needles and the occasional creak of the rocking chair. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, and the wind had picked up, rustling the leaves of the old maple tree in the front yard. Nadine found herself listening for sounds beyond the normal creaks and sighs of her aging house, for the soft tread of paws on the porch, perhaps. Just as she was considering turning in for the night, she heard it, a gentle scratching at the front door. Setting aside her knitting, she rose and opened it to find Brindle sitting there, looking up at her with those unnerving golden eyes. "Well, hello again," she said softly. "We were wondering if you'd come back." Brindle walked past her into the house, but instead of going to his bed, he moved directly to the stairs, looking back at her expectantly. "I want to go up." The cat began climbing, one deliberate step at a time. Puzzled, Nadine followed him up the stairs and down the hallway to Kellen's room. The door was slightly ajar, and Brindle pushed it open with his paw before slipping inside. Nadine watched from the doorway as the cat approached Kellen's bed, where the boy was sleeping peacefully, his breathing deep and even. Brindle jumped lightly onto the bed and settled himself at Kellen's feet, curling into a perfect circle, his eyes fixed on the sleeping child's face. Something about the scene, the watchful cat, the vulnerable boy, brought tears to Nadine's eyes. Whether Brindle was simply a clever stray or something more mysterious, one thing was clear. He had chosen to protect Kellen. "Thank you," she whispered from the doorway, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was thanking him for. For saving Kellen at the mall, certainly. But also perhaps for bringing something new and wondrous into their quiet lives. Brindle blinked slowly at her before closing his eyes, his vigil established. As Nadine made her way back downstairs, she felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. Whatever tomorrow might bring, tonight they were all exactly where they needed to be. Outside, the wind continued to rise, bending the branches of the maple tree and sending clouds scudding across the face of the moon. But inside, all was still, protected, and watched over by a sentinel with golden eyes and a purpose that was only beginning to unfold. What other secrets did Brindle hold? What other lives would he touch with his silent wisdom? The answers would come with time, carried on silent paws through the darkness. Tuesday dawned with a strange heaviness in the air, the kind that presages a storm. Nadine felt it as soon as she opened her eyes, a pressure behind her temples, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that made her joints ache more than usual. Outside, the sky was a flat, leaden grey stretching unbroken from horizon to horizon. She found Kellen already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, with Brindle curled beside him. The boy was stroking the cat's fur with a gentleness that made Nadine's heart swell. "He stayed all night, Grandma," Kellen whispered, as if afraid speaking too loudly might break the spell. "He was right here when I woke up." "He must feel very comfortable with you," Nadine replied, moving to open the curtains. The diffuse morning light did little to brighten the room. "Looks like we might get some rain today." Kellen frowned slightly, peering out at the heavy sky. "Is it going to be a bad storm?" "Just rain, I think. Nothing to worry about." Nadine checked the clock on his bedside table. "Let's get you ready for school. Tuesday is library day, isn't it?" The mention of the library brightened Kellen's mood immediately. Every Tuesday his class visited the school library, where he was allowed to check out any book he wanted. It was a highlight of his week, a love of reading he had inherited from both Nadine and his mother. As they made their way downstairs for breakfast, Brindle followed at a discreet distance, his movements deliberate and unhurried. In the kitchen, he accepted a small portion of cat food, but seemed more interested in sitting by the window, watching the trees bend in the strengthening wind. Weather app says thunderstorms this afternoon, Nadine noted, checking her phone as she prepared Kellen's lunch. But it should clear up by evening. Throughout breakfast, she couldn't help noticing Brindle's unusual attentiveness to the window. Every few minutes he would stand, stretch, and move to a different window, always watching the sky with the same focused intensity he had shown at the mall escalator. "I think he doesn't like storms," Kellen suggested, finishing his cereal. "Maybe," Nadine agreed, though something in her doubted it was that simple. Nothing about Brindle seemed simple. After helping Kellen with his jacket and backpack, Nadine walked him to the end of the driveway to wait for the school bus. The wind had picked up considerably, sending fallen leaves skittering across the pavement in russet waves. "Will you be okay if it storms while I'm at school?" Kellen asked, his concern touching. "Of course, sweetheart. I've weathered plenty of storms in my time." Nadine smoothed his hair, already ruffled by the wind. "And it looks like Brindle might stay with me, so I won't be alone." The school bus appeared around the corner, its yellow presence a bright contrast to the grey morning. Nadine hugged Kellen and helped him up the steps, waving as the bus pulled away. When she turned back toward the house, she was surprised to find Brindle sitting on the front porch, watching her with those unnerving golden eyes. "Just you and me today, it seems," she told him as she climbed the steps. "Unless you have other plans." Inside, Nadine went about her morning routine, washing breakfast dishes, starting a load of laundry, making the beds. All the while, Brindle moved from window to window, his attention never wavering from the darkening sky. By 11 o'clock, the first raindrops were striking the windows fat and heavy. The wind had grown strong enough to make the old house creak and groan. Nadine was just considering whether to bake cookies for Kellen's after-school snack when the phone rang. "Mrs. Harlow, this is Principal Davis from Granville Elementary." A flutter of anxiety immediately took wing in Nadine's chest. "Is Kellen all right?" "He's fine," the principal assured her quickly. "But we're closing early due to the weather. The National Weather Service has issued a severe thunderstorm warning for our county, with possible flash flooding in low-lying areas. We're sending all students home now before roads become hazardous." Nadine moved to the window, where the rain was now coming down in sheets. "Of course, I'll be right there to pick him up." After hanging up, she quickly gathered her purse and car keys. Brindle was waiting by the front door, his tail twitching with unusual agitation. "I need to get Kellen," she told him, feeling only slightly foolish for explaining herself to a cat. "You stay here where it's dry." But as she opened the door, Brindle darted between her legs and out onto the porch. Before she could call him back, he had vanished around the side of the house. "Brindle," she called, but her voice was lost in a sudden crash of thunder. No time to search for him now, she decided. Kellen was waiting, and the storm was worsening by the minute. She hurried to her car, the rain soaking her despite the short distance. The drive to Granville Elementary normally took 10 minutes. Today, with rain hammering the windshield and winds buffeting the car, it took nearly 20. Twice, Nadine had to slow to a crawl to navigate through puddles that were rapidly becoming small ponds across low sections of the road. The school parking lot was a scene of controlled chaos. Parents in raincoats hurrying children to cars, buses lined up with engines running, teachers directing traffic with plastic-covered clipboards held over their heads. Nadine parked as close as she could to the main entrance and made her way inside, shaking water from her hair. Ms. Henderson was waiting with Kellen in the front hallway, along with 3 other children whose parents hadn't yet arrived. "Grandma," Kellen called, his face lighting up with relief. "I was worried about you driving in the rain." "Nothing to worry about," Nadine assured him, helping him into his raincoat. "I've driven through worse." "Thank you for looking after him," she added to Ms. Henderson. "He's been very brave about the storm," the teacher replied with a warm smile. "Even helped calm some of the younger children when the thunder started." Pride swelled in Nadine's chest. Kellen had always been sensitive to others' feelings, despite or perhaps because of his own challenges. As they made their way to the car, protected somewhat by the large umbrella Ms. Henderson had lent them, Kellen looked up at the angry sky. "It's getting worse, isn't it?" "Just a bad thunderstorm," Nadine said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The sky had taken on a greenish tinge that she didn't like at all. "We'll be home soon, safe and sound." They were halfway home when Nadine realized they would need to cross Maple Street Bridge, a small stone structure that spanned Willow Creek at the edge of town. Normally, the creek was little more than a gentle stream, but heavy rains could transform it into a surging torrent. As they approached, Nadine could see water already lapping at the bridge's lower edge. Several cars were stopped at the approach, their drivers out and peering at the rising water. "Why are we stopping?" Kellen asked, pressing his face against the window. "The bridge might not be safe," Nadine explained, pulling to the side of the road behind the other vehicles. "We need to wait and see." One of the other drivers, a man in a rain-slicked yellow jacket, approached her window. Nadine lowered it slightly to hear him over the drumming rain. "Road crews on their way," he shouted. "Creek's rising fast. They're saying maybe 20 minutes before they can assess if it's safe to cross." Nadine thanked him and rolled the window back up, considering their options. They could wait, hoping the bridge would be declared safe. Or they could backtrack and take the long way around, an additional 40 minutes in these conditions, past areas that might be equally flooded. "What do we do now?" Kellen asked, his voice small. Before Nadine could answer, something caught her eye. A flash of movement on the far side of the bridge. Squinting through the rain-blurred windshield, she made out a familiar form, a slender cat with marbled grey and ivory stripes standing directly in the center of the road. "Brindle," she breathed. The cat was staring at them, unmoving despite the rain that must have been soaking him to the skin. As Nadine watched, he deliberately turned his head toward the bridge, then back to their car, then walked a few paces to the left, away from the bridge approach. "What's he doing here?" Kellen asked, spotting the cat as well. "He's getting all wet." Nadine felt that same chill she had experienced at the mall escalator, a sense of something beyond ordinary understanding unfolding before her eyes. I think he's showing us something." Brindle continued to pace back and forth, always moving away from the bridge, always returning to stare directly at their car. "He wants us to go that way," Kellen said with absolute certainty, "like how he stopped us at the mall." Nadine hesitated only a moment longer. The memory of the escalator, of what might have happened if they hadn't heeded Brindle's strange warning, was still vivid in her mind. "Buckle up tight," she told Kellen, putting the car in reverse. "We're taking the long way home." As she carefully turned the car around, she saw Brindle watching them, golden eyes gleaming even in the grey downpour. Once he seemed satisfied they were heading away from the bridge, he darted into the underbrush and vanished. The detour took them through the outskirts of town, past the old mill and eventually onto Highland Road, which approached their neighborhood from the north. The journey was tense, visibility poor, the road slick with running water, but Nadine drove with the careful concentration of someone who understood the stakes. They were less than a mile from home when the emergency alert came over the car radio. "Flash flood warning upgraded. Maple Street Bridge has been compromised. Repeat, Maple Street Bridge has partially collapsed due to flood waters. All citizens advised to seek alternate routes and avoid low-lying areas." Nadine and Kellen exchanged a look of shocked understanding. Had they waited at the bridge? Had they attempted to cross? "He knew," Kellen whispered. Brindle knew the bridge would break. Nadine couldn't argue with him. Whatever explanation there might be, that Brindle had somehow sensed structural weaknesses, that he had felt vibrations or noticed signs humans had missed, the fact remained. For the second time, the cat had prevented them from walking into danger. When they finally reached home, the rain had slackened somewhat, though the wind continued to howl around the eaves. Nadine helped Kellen inside, both of them soaked despite their raincoats and her umbrella. "Go change into dry clothes," she instructed. "I'll make some hot chocolate." While Kellen was upstairs, Nadine stood at the kitchen window, watching water cascade from the overflowing gutters. Her mind was churning with questions that had no easy answers. What was Brindle? How had he known about the bridge? And most persistently, why them? Why had this extraordinary creature chosen to intersect his life with theirs? The sound of the front door opening broke into her thoughts. Turning, she saw Brindle padding into the kitchen, his fur damp but not soaked through. He acknowledged her with a slow blink before moving to his water bowl, drinking deeply. "You were there," Nadine said quietly. "At the bridge. How did you know?" Brindle finished drinking and looked up at her, eyes reflecting the kitchen light like twin amber flames. There was something in that gaze, an intelligence, a presence, that transcended ordinary animal awareness. Kellen's voice came from the doorway. "He's a guardian angel, remember? That's how he knew." Dressed in dry clothes, his hair still damp, Kellen made his way to where Brindle sat. Carefully lowering himself to the cat's level, he reached out and, with solemn deliberation, wrapped his arms around Brindle's neck in a gentle hug. "Thank you for saving us again," he whispered. To Nadine's amazement, Brindle not only tolerated the embrace but leaned into it slightly, eyes half closed in what appeared to be contentment. The rest of the afternoon passed in a cocoon of warmth and safety as the storm gradually moved eastward. They played board games at the kitchen table, Brindle a silent observer from his position on a nearby chair. They baked cookies, the sweet scent of vanilla and chocolate filling the house. And as darkness fell, they gathered in the living room, Nadine reading aloud from one of Kellen's favorite books, while the boy stroked Brindle's fur with gentle, appreciative hands. Later that evening, after Kellen had gone to bed, with Brindle once again stationed at his feet, Nadine sat alone at the kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold before her. She had just gotten off the phone with Rachel, who had called in a panic after seeing news reports about flooding in Granville. "We're fine," Nadine had assured her. "We took the Highland Road route instead of crossing Maple Street Bridge." She had hesitated then, uncertain how much to share about Brindle's role in their decision. Rachel already thought her mother was becoming fanciful in her old age. Would she believe that a stray cat had somehow guided them away from danger? In the end, Nadine had simply said they had been warned by a local resident that the bridge looked unsafe. It wasn't entirely untrue. Brindle was, in his way, becoming a resident of their home. As she finally prepared for bed, Nadine paused at Kellen's door, cracking it open to check on him. He was sleeping peacefully, one arm thrown over Brindle, who was awake and alert, golden eyes shining in the darkness. The cat acknowledged her presence with a slow blink before returning his attention to the sleeping child. Watching them, Nadine felt a certainty settle deep in her bones. Whatever Brindle was, stray cat, guardian angel, or something else entirely, he had come into their lives for a purpose. And somehow, she suspected that purpose extended beyond the two incidents they had already experienced. What else might lie ahead? What other dangers might this remarkable creature help them navigate? As she closed the door softly and made her way to her own room, Nadine found herself both apprehensive and strangely comforted by the knowledge that they were being watched over by a sentinel with golden eyes and mysterious wisdom. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world that glistened under a newly emerged moon. But other storms, other challenges, undoubtedly lay ahead. And when they came, Nadine now believed, they would not face them alone. By Friday morning, life in Granville had largely returned to normal. The thunderstorms had passed, leaving behind puddles that reflected the clear blue sky, and a freshness in the air that spoke of renewal. Maple Street Bridge remained closed, steel barriers and yellow caution tape blocking both approaches, while crews assessed the damage. But alternative routes were well marked, and town life flowed around the obstacle like water around a stone. For Nadine and Kellen, the week had settled into a new routine, one that now included Brindle as a constant presence. The cat came and went as he pleased, disappearing for hours at a time, only to reappear precisely when expected. At mealtimes, when Kellen returned from school, and most reliably at bedtime when he would take up his position at the foot of the boy's bed, a silent guardian through the night. "Today's show-and-tell day," Kellen reminded Nadine as she helped him button his shirt. Excitement had him wiggling more than usual, making the task challenging. "I'm going to tell everyone about Brindle saving us twice." Nadine smiled, finally managing the last button. "Just remember what we talked about. Some people might find it hard to believe." "But it's true," Kellen insisted, his brow furrowing. "Yes, it is," Nadine agreed. "Sometimes truth is more extraordinary than anything we could make up." After breakfast, Nadine helped Kellen gather his materials for show and tell. Several photographs she had taken of Brindle around the house, the handmade bandana Kellen had created, which Brindle allowed to be tied around his neck for special occasions, and a carefully written story about their experiences at the mall and the bridge. As they prepared to leave for the bus stop, Brindle appeared from wherever he had been spending his morning and sat in the front hallway, watching their preparations with his usual focused attention. "Wish me luck, Brindle," Kellen called to him. "I'm going to make you famous today." The cat blinked slowly in response, a gesture that Nadine had come to interpret as affection or acknowledgement. The morning passed quietly for Nadine. She tidied the house, spoke briefly with Clarice on the phone about plans for the weekend, and began preparing a special dinner to celebrate Kellen's first week with Brindle. Throughout it all, the cat remained in the house, moving from window to window in what Nadine now recognized as his regular patrol, always watching, always alert. Around noon, Nadine was startled by a knock at the door. Opening it, she found George, the mall security guard, standing on her porch. He was dressed in civilian clothes, jeans and a plaid shirt, rather than his usual uniform. "Mrs. Harlow," he greeted her. "Hope I'm not disturbing you. I wanted to check if your cat friend is still around." Nadine smiled, opening the door wider. "As a matter of fact, he is. Please come in and call me Nadine." George entered, wiping his feet carefully on the doormat. "George Williams," he introduced himself properly. "We've only ever met at the mall." As if on cue, Brindle appeared from the living room, regarding the visitor with cautious interest. "Well, hello there," George said softly, kneeling down despite his obvious stiffness. "You've become quite the local celebrity, haven't you?" Brindle approached him slowly, sniffing his extended hand before allowing a brief touch to his head. "He seems to have settled in with you," George observed, straightening up with a slight wince. "Tea?" Nadine offered, leading the way to the kitchen. "Or coffee?" "Tea would be wonderful, thank you." As Nadine prepared the tea, George explained the purpose of his visit. "I've been looking through the mall security footage from the past month, ever since your escalator incident. Wanted to see if there were any patterns to Brindle's behavior." "And?" Nadine prompted, setting 2 mugs on the table. George pulled a small notebook from his pocket. "It's interesting. He started appearing about 6 weeks ago, always on Wednesdays at first, but as time went on, his visits became more frequent, and he began spending more time near specific areas. The escalator, yes, but also the electrical room, the emergency exits, the sprinkler system control panel." Nadine thought of what Clarice had told her about the lavender circles near exits. Like he was inspecting safety features. Exactly. George looked pleased that she understood. "I showed the footage to the fire inspector who was at the mall yesterday," George continued, warming his hands around the mug of tea. He was intrigued enough to do some extra checks of the systems Brindle seemed interested in. "And?" Nadine prompted, feeling a familiar flutter of anticipation in her chest. George leaned forward. "They found 3 significant issues. The electrical room had frayed wiring that was a fire hazard. One emergency exit door had a faulty mechanism that might have jammed during an evacuation, and the sprinkler system in the west wing wasn't properly pressurized." Nadine sat back in her chair, processing this information. Across the kitchen, Brindle had settled on the windowsill, seemingly uninterested in their conversation, yet somehow giving the impression that he was listening to every word. "So the escalator wasn't an isolated incident," she said quietly. "Doesn't seem like it." George took a sip of his tea. "The mall was built in 1985. A lot of the original systems are reaching the end of their operational life. Budget cuts meant some maintenance checks were less thorough than they should have been. And somehow Brindle knew." George gave a half smile. "I'm not saying your cat is some kind of supernatural safety inspector, but animals sense things we don't. Changes in air pressure, subtle vibrations, even electrical fields. And maybe he was picking up on problems we couldn't detect without specialized equipment." Nadine watched Brindle, who was now grooming himself with methodical precision. "My grandson Kellen calls him the Sentinel of Silence." "Smart kid," George nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what he is." They talked for a while longer, about the mall repairs, about the bridge collapse, which would have been catastrophic had anyone been crossing at the time, and about Brindle's continuing presence in Nadine's home. "He's become part of our family," she admitted, "though I still feel like he has his own agenda, his own purpose. He's not just a pet." "Some animals are like that," George agreed. "My grandfather had a dog during the Depression, a mutt named Scout, who would lead him to odd jobs when work was scarce. Somehow always knew where help was needed and where they'd pay for it, even just with a meal. Granddad used to say Scout was plugged into the universe in a way humans weren't." After George left, promising to keep her updated on the mall renovations, Nadine found herself watching Brindle with renewed wonder. What else might he be sensing that remained invisible to human perception? The afternoon school bus delivered Kellen at his usual time, his face alight with excitement as he maneuvered his walker up the driveway. "Grandma, everyone loved my presentation. Miss Henderson said it was the best show and tell of the year." Inside, Kellen regaled her with details about how his classmates had reacted to the story of Brindle's interventions. Some had been skeptical, of course, but most had been fascinated, especially after Kellen showed them the newspaper clipping about the mall incident. "And guess what else?" he continued, barely pausing for breath. "Lily's mom works at the radio station, and she wants to interview us about Brindle for her Sunday program. Can we do it, please?" Nadine hesitated. While Kellen had embraced his role as Brindle's champion, she was less comfortable with publicity. And yet there was something about their story that seemed important to share, a reminder that the world still contained mysteries and unexpected guardians. "Let me think about it," she promised. "Now, how about helping me make apple crisp for dessert?" That evening, after dinner and homework were completed, they settled in the living room for their nightly reading session. Brindle had taken up his favorite position on the window seat, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Outside, the maple trees along their street were beginning to show the first hints of autumn color, touches of gold and crimson among the green. Kellen had chosen a book about animals with extraordinary abilities: dolphins who guided lost sailors to shore, dogs who detected cancer, elephants who predicted earthquakes. As Nadine read aloud, she couldn't help glancing at Brindle, wondering where he fit in this spectrum of animal intelligence and awareness. "Grandma," Kellen said when they had finished the chapter about a pig who had saved its owner from a heart attack by knocking a phone off a table, "do you think Brindle was sent to us for a reason?" Nadine considered the question carefully. "I think there are many things in this world we don't fully understand. Why certain people come into our lives at certain times. Why some animals seem to have abilities beyond what we expect. Maybe Brindle found us because we needed him, or because he needed us. Or both," Kellen suggested. "Or both," she agreed with a smile. Later, after Kellen was asleep and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, Nadine sat at her kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and her journal. She had started keeping a record of Brindle's behaviors, his comings and goings, his areas of interest, his interactions with them. Perhaps over time patterns would emerge that might help explain his unusual awareness. As she wrote, she became aware of Brindle sitting in the doorway, watching her with those intelligent golden eyes. "What secrets are you keeping?" she asked him softly. "What else do you know that we don't?" Brindle merely blinked slowly at her before turning and padding silently upstairs, presumably to take up his guard position at Kellen's bedside. The weekend brought perfect autumn weather, crisp mornings that warmed to pleasant afternoons, with a sky so intensely blue it almost hurt to look at it. On Saturday, Nadine took Kellen to the farmer's market, where they bought apples and pumpkins and warm cider that steamed in the cool air. Brindle stayed home during these outings, but was always waiting when they returned, greeting them at the door as if he'd been counting the minutes. In quieter moments, Nadine sometimes caught him staring at seemingly ordinary objects with unusual intensity: the ceiling near the attic access, the basement door, the old elm tree that stood at the corner of their property. On Sunday morning, they prepared for Nadine's second reading session at the library. Kellen was especially excited because they had decided to bring Brindle along, not inside where pets weren't allowed, but to sit in his now customary place at the garden window. "Everyone wants to meet him," Kellen explained as Nadine helped him secure his special bandana around Brindle's neck. The cat submitted to this decoration with surprising patience. All the kids from last week told their friends about the cat who watches through the window. Indeed, when they arrived at the library, a small crowd of children was already gathered at the garden window, noses pressed against the glass in anticipation. Marian, the children's librarian, greeted them with amused exasperation. "Your cat has caused quite a stir," she told Nadine. "I've had calls all week asking if the story cat would be back today." Nadine smiled apologetically. "I hope it's not disruptive." "Are you kidding? Our Sunday attendance has doubled. Whatever gets children excited about the library is fine by me." The reading session was even more successful than the previous week. Nadine had selected books about remarkable animals, and the children listened with rapt attention, frequently glancing at Brindle, who sat regally at his window, the perfect illustration of the theme. Afterward, as children and parents mingled in the garden, Many asked to meet Brindle. The cat accepted their attention with dignified tolerance, allowing gentle pats, but maintaining an air of slight aloofness that only enhanced his mystique. "He's become quite the celebrity," Marion observed, watching as a small girl carefully offered Brindle a bit of her cookie, which he politely declined. "I've been reading about cats throughout history, how they were worshipped in ancient Egypt, how sailors considered them lucky on ships, how some cultures believed they could see spirits." "What do you think?" Nadine asked, curious about the librarian's perspective. Marion adjusted her blue reading glasses. "I think we humans are quick to dismiss intelligence that doesn't look like our own. Who's to say what awareness another species might possess? Cats have been living alongside us for thousands of years, observing our habits, our structures, our vulnerabilities. Perhaps some of them learn more than we realize." As they prepared to leave, Lily's mother approached them. She was a friendly woman in her 30s, with curly red hair and a notebook perpetually in hand, a journalist's habit. "I was hoping to talk to you about that radio interview," she said. "Our Sunday morning program focuses on local interest stories, and Brindle's adventures would be perfect. Nothing intrusive, just a 10-minute segment about your experiences." Kellen looked up at Nadine with pleading eyes. "Can we, Grandma? Please." Nadine hesitated only briefly before nodding. "All right, but I want to make it clear that we're not claiming anything supernatural. Brindle is a remarkable cat, but we don't pretend to understand exactly how he does what he does." "Of course," Lily's mother agreed readily. "We'll present it as an interesting local phenomenon, nothing more." They arranged for the interview to take place the following weekend, giving Nadine time to prepare what she wanted to say, and what she didn't. The drive home was peaceful, with Kellen chattering happily about how his friends at school wouldn't believe Brindle was now going to be on the radio. In the carrier on the back seat, Brindle was silent, though his golden eyes remained alert, taking in the passing scenery as if memorizing landmarks. As they turned onto their street, Nadine noticed something unusual. A large branch from the old elm tree had fallen across their front yard. It hadn't been there when they left for the library. "Stay in the car for a minute," she instructed Kellen as she pulled into the driveway. "I need to check something." Approaching the fallen branch cautiously, Nadine saw that it had narrowly missed hitting the house. It was massive, at least 15 feet long and thick as a man's waist. Had it fallen at a slightly different angle, it could have crashed through Kellen's bedroom window. A movement caught her eye. Brindle had somehow escaped from his carrier and was now investigating the branch, sniffing along its length with focused attention. He stopped at a section where the wood was discolored, almost blackened. When Nadine examined it more closely, she saw tiny holes riddling the surface, evidence of some kind of infestation that had weakened the limb from within. Later that afternoon, as a tree service crew worked to remove the branch and examine the rest of the elm for similar damage, Nadine sat on the porch steps with Brindle beside her. The tree specialist had confirmed what she had begun to suspect. The entire elm was compromised by disease and insect damage. It would need to be removed before another branch fell, possibly with more destructive consequences. "So you knew about this too, didn't you?" she murmured to Brindle, who was watching the workers with his characteristic intensity. "That's why you've been staring at that tree all week." Brindle turned to look at her, and in that moment, with the golden afternoon light reflecting in his amber eyes, Nadine felt a certainty beyond rational explanation. This extraordinary cat had come into their lives as a protector, a sentinel who perceived dangers before they manifested. The escalator, the bridge, the tree, how many other potential tragedies had been averted by his silent vigilance? As twilight descended and the tree crew packed up their equipment, promising to return Tuesday to remove the diseased elm, Nadine found herself wondering what had brought Brindle to Grandville in the first place, and how many other lives had he touched, perhaps saved, before crossing paths with her and Kellen. The answers, if they existed, remained locked behind those knowing golden eyes. But as she watched Kellen carefully serving Brindle his evening meal, a special portion of tuna, as a reward for his tree warning, Nadine felt a deep gratitude that whatever cosmic coincidence or design had sent this remarkable creature their way, he had chosen to stay. That night, as a precaution, they all slept in the guest room downstairs, away from any danger should another branch fall. Kellen in the bed, Nadine on the fold-out couch, and Brindle positioned between them, a silent guardian keeping watch through the night. Outside, Stars wheeled slowly across the sky, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called, one nocturnal sentinel, acknowledging another. The world was full of watchers, some seen, some unseen, all part of the intricate tapestry that connected lives in ways beyond human understanding. And in Granville, one such sentinel had grey and ivory stripes, golden eyes and a purpose that was still unfolding. One saved life at a time. October arrived in Granville with a dramatic flourish of colour. The maple trees lining Main Street blazed in shades of crimson and gold, while the oaks in the town square dressed themselves in russet and amber. Mornings arrived with a crisp bite that softened into gentle warmth by afternoon, only to surrender again to cool evenings that smelled of wood smoke and ripening apples. For Nadine and Kellen, the rhythm of autumn brought new routines and expanding circles. The Sunday reading program at the library had become so popular that Marion had asked Nadine to consider adding a Wednesday afternoon session as well. Kellen's teacher had noted improvement in his coordination and confidence, benefits she attributed to his special bond with Brindle, who had become something of a mascot for his class after a carefully supervised visit to show and tell. And Brindle himself had settled into their lives with the ease of a being who had always belonged there, yet maintained an independence that reminded them daily of his unusual nature. He still disappeared for hours at a time, following patterns only he understood, but always returned for meals, for Kellen's bedtime, and whenever storms threatened. The radio interview, conducted in their living room on a sunny Saturday morning, had aired the previous weekend to unexpected attention. What Lily's mother had envisioned as a charming local interest piece had sparked calls from listeners across the county, many sharing their own stories of animals with seemingly extraordinary awareness. "It's gone a bit viral, as the kids say," Marion told Nadine as they prepared for the Wednesday reading session. "Someone posted a recording of the program online, and it's been shared by several of those websites that collect strange but true stories." Nadine wasn't entirely comfortable with the attention. "We never claimed Brindle was anything more than an unusually perceptive cat. That's what makes it credible," Marion pointed out. "You didn't exaggerate or embellish. The facts speak for themselves. 3 potentially dangerous situations averted because of his behavior." As they spoke, Brindle was in his customary place at the library garden window, watching a group of preschoolers who were on a field trip to the library. The children waved at him excitedly, already familiar with the story cat from their teachers' descriptions. The reading session that day featured books about autumn and Halloween, with a special focus on black cats and the superstitions surrounding them. Nadine had chosen the theme carefully, wanting to emphasize how cats had been both revered and misunderstood throughout history. In ancient Egypt, she told the children gathered on the colorful rug before her, cats were considered sacred animals. People believed they brought good luck and protection to homes. Some were even mummified when they died, just like the pharaohs. "Like Brindle brings protection?" asked a small boy in a Spider-Man sweater. Nadine smiled. "Yes, like that. But in medieval Europe, some people began to fear cats, especially black ones. They didn't understand cats' natural behaviors, like being active at night or being very sensitive to changes in their environment. My grandpa says animals know things people don't," offered a girl with braided pigtails. "He says his dog always knows when it's going to storm, even before the weather people on TV. Many animals do have senses that are different from ours," Nadine agreed. "They can hear sounds we can't hear, smell things we can't smell, and notice changes we might miss." After the session ended and the children had dispersed to select books to check out, Marion approached Nadine with an unusual expression, hesitant yet excited. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," she said, glancing toward the reference section. "She came in specifically hoping to talk to you about Brindle." Nadine followed Marion's gaze to where an elderly woman sat at a reading table. She must have been in her late 80s at least, with snow-white hair pulled back in a neat bun and hands gnarled by arthritis, but still elegant. Something about her bearing suggested dignity and quiet strength. "Her name is Eleanor Whitman," Marion explained in a low voice. "She's lived in Granville all her life, was the town's first female doctor, back when that was practically unheard of, retired 20 years ago, but still sharp as a tack." Intrigued, Nadine approached the table. Dr. Whitman looked up, her pale blue eyes brightening with interest. "Mrs. Harlow," she said, her voice surprisingly strong for her age. "Thank you for seeing me." Please sit down. Nadine settled into the chair across from her, aware that Kellen was watching curiously from the children's section where he was helping Marion shelve picture books. I listened to your interview about your remarkable cat, Dr. Whitman continued. The description caught my attention immediately. Grey and ivory marbled coat, unusually intelligent golden eyes, an apparent ability to sense danger before it occurs. Yes, that's Brindle, Nadine confirmed. Though we don't claim to understand exactly how he does what he does, Dr. Whitman smiled, fine lines crinkling around her eyes. No explanation needed, my dear. I believe I've encountered him before, or at least a cat remarkably similar in both appearance and behavior. Nadine leaned forward, immediately interested. Recently? Oh no, Dr. Whitman shook her head. The first time was in 1952, when I was a young doctor just starting my practice here. Nadine blinked in surprise. 1952? That's over 70 years ago. Indeed it is. Dr. Whitman's eyes took on a faraway look. I had just returned from medical school in Boston, one of only 3 women in my class, mind you. Most people in town weren't ready to trust a female physician, especially one barely 30 years old. My practice was struggling. She paused, fingers tracing an invisible pattern on the table. That summer there was a heat wave, brutal temperatures day after day. I had set up my office in the old Henderson building on Elm Street. Where the bakery is now, Nadine asked. The very same. One morning I arrived to find a cat sitting on my doorstep, a slender thing with a marbled grey and ivory coat and the most extraordinary golden eyes. At first I thought he was just seeking shade, but he wouldn't leave. Kept pacing between me and the building entrance, then sitting and staring at me as if trying to communicate something. Nadine felt a chill of recognition. Just like Brindle at the mall escalator. Precisely. Dr. Whitman nodded. Being young and stubborn, I tried to shoo him away, but he was equally stubborn. Finally, because it was so hot and I was getting nowhere, I decided to check the building before entering. She leaned forward slightly. Good thing I did. The electrical wiring, old even then, had overheated during the night. There was a smouldering fire inside the walls, just beginning to catch properly. Had I gone in and opened doors, creating a draft? She made a soft whooshing sound. The whole building might have gone up with me inside. The cat warned you, Nadine said quietly. Indeed he did. And that was just the beginning. After the fire department contained the blaze and I relocated my practice to a room in my home, the cat began appearing regularly, always on days when something significant was about to happen. Before a major storm, when a patient was about to come in with a critical condition I needed to prepare for. Once he led me to an overturned car on a back road where a young mother was trapped with her infant. Dr. Whitman's eyes met Nadine's directly. I called him Sentinel. For nearly 3 years he was a regular presence in my life. Never fully a pet, never staying indoors for long, but always there when needed. Then, as mysteriously as he had appeared, he vanished. And you think Brindle might be the same cat? Nadine asked, though even as she said it she realized how impossible that would be. Dr. Whitman chuckled softly. No, my dear, even cats don't live 70 years. But I don't believe Sentinel was the only one of his kind. After he disappeared, I began researching similar accounts. I found stories going back decades, all describing cats with the same distinctive appearance and behaviors. From her handbag, she withdrew a slim leather journal. I've documented 17 separate accounts in Granville and surrounding areas, dating from 1932 to 2018. Different cats, obviously, but with remarkable similarities. The coloring, the golden eyes, and most importantly, the apparent ability to sense danger and guide humans away from it. Nadine accepted the journal with careful hands, opening it to find neat handwriting documenting dates, locations, and brief descriptions of incidents involving cats matching Brindle's description. May 1932, grey and ivory cat warns Johnson family of gas leak by refusing to let children enter kitchen. September 1947, marbled cat leads hikers away from unstable cliff edge minutes before collapse. December 1965, golden-eyed stray alerts night watchman to broken water pipe in elementary school, preventing major flood damage. The entries continued through the decades, each describing interventions that had prevented accidents, injuries, or worse. You've been collecting these stories all this time? Nadine asked, impressed by the doctor's dedication. A hobby of mine, Dr. Whitman acknowledged. After Sentinel, I became fascinated by the possibility that certain animals might possess awareness beyond what we typically attribute to them. Not supernatural abilities necessarily, but perhaps heightened senses combined with intelligence and something else. A purpose, perhaps. Kellen had drifted over to their table, drawn by the intensity of their conversation. "Are you talking about Brindle?" he asked, his walker squeaking slightly as he positioned himself beside Nadine. Dr. Whitman smiled at him warmly. "Indeed we are, young man, and other cats like him who have helped people over the years." Kellen's eyes widened. "There are more Sentinel cats?" "Sentinel?" Dr. Whitman raised an eyebrow, looking at Nadine. "Kellen calls Brindle the Sentinel of Silence," Nadine explained. "He came up with it himself." "How perfectly appropriate," Dr. Whitman murmured, clearly impressed. To Kellen she said, "Yes, I believe there have been several such cats over the years, special guardians who appear when and where they're needed most." "Why do they look the same?" Kellen asked, his natural curiosity engaged. "Are they related?" "That's an excellent question," Dr. Whitman replied. "They could be descended from the same bloodline, I suppose, or perhaps whatever makes them special also influences their appearance." As they talked, Nadine became aware of movement at the garden window. Brindle, who had been sitting outside observing, was now standing with his paws against the glass, golden eyes fixed on Dr. Whitman with unusual intensity. "I believe your friend wants to meet our visitor," she said to Kellen, nodding toward the window. Together the three of them moved outside to the garden, where Brindle waited with focused attention. When Dr. Whitman approached, he didn't retreat, but instead moved toward her, sniffing her outstretched hand, before allowing her to stroke his head. "Hello, old friend," the elderly doctor said softly. "Not the same, but similar, aren't you? Part of the same lineage, shall we say?" Brindle pressed his head against her hand, a gesture of affection he rarely showed to strangers. "He likes you," Kellen observed with delight. "Recognition, perhaps," Dr. Whitman suggested. "Or maybe he simply knows I mean him no harm." They spent the next hour in the garden, Dr. Whitman sharing more stories from her journal, while Brindle remained close by, sometimes watching them, sometimes scanning the surroundings with his characteristic vigilance. Before she left, Dr. Whitman pressed the journal into Nadine's hands. "I'd like you to have this. Add your own experiences with Brindle. Perhaps someday all these accounts together might help us understand what makes these special animals who they are." "I couldn't take your research," Nadine protested. "I've made copies of the important parts," Dr. Whitman assured her. "And truthfully, at my age, I'm looking for the right custodians for various projects. You and Kellen have been chosen by one of these remarkable guardians. That makes you the perfect caretakers for these stories as well." On the drive home, Kellen was unusually quiet, processing everything they had learned. Finally, as they turned onto their street, he asked, "Grandma, do you think Brindle will disappear someday like the other Sentinel cats?" The question caught Nadine off guard. She had been so focused on the wonder of Dr. Whitman's revelations that she hadn't considered their implications. According to the journal, none of the special cats had remained with their chosen humans for more than a few years. "I don't know, sweetheart," she answered truthfully. "But if Dr. Whitman is right, these cats seem to appear when they're needed and move on when their work is done." "But we'll always need Brindle," Kellen insisted, his voice small. Nadine reached over to squeeze his hand. "Then perhaps he'll stay longer than the others. And even if someday he does move on, we'll always have the gift of having known him." That evening, after Kellen was asleep, Nadine sat at the kitchen table with Dr. Whitman's journal open before her and a fresh notebook of her own beside it. Brindle was perched on the windowsill, silhouetted against the rising moon, his attention fixed on something outside that Nadine couldn't see. "How many lives have you and your kind saved over the years?" she wondered aloud. "How many disasters averted that no one ever knew about?" Brindle turned to look at her, golden eyes reflecting the kitchen light. For a moment, Nadine had the strange sensation that he was considering whether to answer, that if he could speak, he might share mysteries beyond human comprehension. Instead, he simply blinked slowly, then returned his gaze to the night. Nadine began writing in her notebook, documenting everything they had experienced with Brindle so far. Not just the major interventions at the escalator and bridge, but the smaller moments too. his focused attention on the elm tree before the branch fell, his restlessness before storms, his particular interest in certain parts of the house that might warrant inspection. As she wrote, a pattern began to emerge, not just of a cat with unusual perception, but of a guardian whose purpose seemed specifically tailored to their needs. Had Brindle appeared in their lives precisely because Kellen was vulnerable? Because Nadine, despite her capabilities, was an elderly woman living alone with her special needs grandson? The implications were both comforting and unsettling. If such guardians existed, animals with awareness beyond ordinary understanding, who intervened at critical moments, what did that suggest about the universe they inhabited? Was it mere evolutionary coincidence that had produced these remarkable creatures? Or was there some deeper design at work, some intelligence that sent silent sentinels when and where they were most needed? Nadine had never been particularly religious, but she had always believed in a fundamental order to the world, that life, despite its apparent chaos, followed patterns too complex for human minds to fully grasp. Perhaps Brindle and his kind were part of that pattern, threads in a tapestry woven across time and space. As midnight approached, she closed both journals and prepared for bed. Brindle had already gone upstairs to take up his nightly position at Kellen's feet. Tomorrow would bring new discoveries, new connections, perhaps even new interventions. For now it was enough to know that they were being watched over by a guardian whose silent wisdom transcended ordinary understanding. Outside, the October moon cast silver light across Grandville, illuminating rooftops and treetops, streets and gardens. And somewhere in the shadows, perhaps other golden eyes were watching, other silent sentinels standing guard over those who needed them most. What further revelations would Brindle bring into their lives? What other mysteries might unfold in the days ahead? The answers waited just beyond the horizon, carried on silent paws, and whispered in the language of golden eyes. November arrived with a rush of wind that stripped the last reluctant leaves from the trees and sent them dancing down Granville's streets in swirling eddies of gold and brown. Mornings dawned with frost etching delicate patterns on windows, and evenings settled in earlier each day, bringing with them the cozy intimacy of lamplight and hearth fires. For Nadine and Kellen, the changing season brought new rhythms to their lives: flannel sheets on beds, extra blankets in the living room, and the comforting scent of simmering soups and baking bread that filled their home with warmth beyond mere temperature. And through it all, Brindle remained a constant presence, sometimes in the background, sometimes at the center of attention, but always watching, always aware in that particular way that still occasionally sent shivers up Nadine's spine. In the month since their meeting with Dr. Whitman, Nadine had added several entries to what she now thought of as the Sentinel Chronicles. None were as dramatic as the escalator or bridge incidents, but each reinforced her growing certainty that Brindle possessed awareness beyond ordinary feline capabilities. October 18th, Brindle refused to let Kellen board the school bus, standing in the doorway and actually hissing when they tried to leave the house. 15 minutes later, the bus was involved in a minor accident when a delivery truck ran a stop sign. No children were injured, but the delay meant Kellen wasn't on board when it happened. October 24th, Brindle woke Nadine at 3 a.m., pouring persistently at her face until she got up. She found the kitchen faucet had been dripping steadily, with water already overflowing the sink and soaking through the ceiling of the basement below, dangerously close to the electrical panel. November 2nd, while walking in the park, Brindle suddenly darted ahead and began circling and meowing at a specific spot on the frozen pond where children were skating. The ice in that area collapsed minutes later, revealing a dangerously thin section that could have caused a serious accident if skaters had ventured onto it. Each incident added to the growing local legend of Granville's guardian cat. Strangers sometimes recognized Brindle when Nadine took him along on errands, securely harnessed, though he rarely seemed to need the restraint. Children would point and whisper, "That's the magic cat." Adults would smile and nod respectfully, a few even approaching to share their own stories of animals with unusual awareness. Clarice had created a special display in her flower shop window, featuring lavender arrangements and a framed photograph of Brindle sitting regally amid purple blooms. "Lavender sales have tripled," she reported happily to Nadine. "People believe it attracts good fortune now." But fame, even local celebrity, brought complications as well. A reporter from the regional newspaper had called requesting an interview and photo shoot. A self-proclaimed paranormal investigator had left a note in their mailbox asking to test the cat's psychic abilities. Most concerning to Nadine, a woman had approached them in the grocery store parking lot, offering a substantial sum to purchase Brindle. "He's not for sale," Kellen had declared firmly before Nadine could even respond. "He's family." The woman had persisted, suggesting increasingly larger amounts until Nadine had firmly ended the conversation by driving away. But the encounter left her uneasy. What if someone tried to take Brindle, believing he possessed supernatural powers or monetary value? That evening, she called Rachel to discuss her concerns. "Maybe you should get him microchipped," her daughter suggested. "And maybe don't take him out in public quite so much. If he's as special as you believe, Mom, there are people who might try to exploit that." "You believe me about him now?" Nadine asked, surprised by the lack of skepticism in Rachel's voice. There was a pause on the line. "I've been doing some research since you told me about Dr. Whitman's journal. There are documented cases throughout history of animals exhibiting what scientists call anticipatory behavior, sensing earthquakes, detecting illnesses, finding their way home across impossible distances. I don't know if Brindle is supernatural, but I believe he's extraordinary, and that makes him potentially valuable to the wrong people." Nadine took her daughter's advice, arranging for Brindle to be microchipped and updating the engraved tag on his collar with their contact information. She became more selective about when and where she took him in public, though she continued to bring him to the library readings, where his presence had become expected. As Thanksgiving approached, preparations began for Rachel's visit. She would be arriving the day before the holiday and staying through the weekend, her first trip home since moving to Seattle 10 months earlier. "Do you think Mum will like Brindle?" Kellen asked, as he helped Nadine dust the guest room. "I'm sure she will," Nadine assured him, though privately she wondered. Rachel had always been practical and analytical, qualities that had served her well in her career as a software engineer, but sometimes made her skeptical of anything that couldn't be easily explained. The day before Rachel's arrival, Nadine was checking items off her preparation list when she noticed Brindle's unusual behavior. He was moving restlessly through the house, pausing at windows, doors, and particularly near the phone. Several times he sat directly in front of Nadine, staring at her with an intensity that seemed to convey urgency. "What is it?" Nadine asked him, kneeling despite her arthritic knees to meet his golden gaze. "Are you trying to tell me something?" Brindle meowed, a rare vocalization for him, and moved to the front door, looking back at her expectantly. Nadine had learned to trust these signals. "Is there something outside we need to check?" Before she could open the door, the phone rang. The caller ID showed Rachel's number. "Mom!" Rachel's voice sounded strained. "I'm at the airport, but there's a problem. All flights are grounded because of a massive storm system. They're saying nothing will leave until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest." Nadine felt a wave of disappointment, followed quickly by concern. "Are you somewhere safe? Do you have a hotel?" "I'm fine," Rachel assured her. "They've arranged accommodations for stranded passengers. I'm so sorry about Thanksgiving, though. I know you and Kellen were looking forward to it." "We'll still have our dinner," Nadine said, trying to keep her voice light for Rachel's sake. "It just won't be the same without you." After hanging up, Nadine turned to find Brindle still sitting by the door, watching her with what now seemed like sympathy in his golden eyes. "You knew," she said softly. "Somehow you knew she wasn't coming." Telling Kellen was the hardest part. His face fell with the particular devastating disappointment that children feel when long-anticipated plans collapse. "But she promised," he said, lower lip trembling. "She said she wouldn't miss Thanksgiving no matter what." "Sometimes circumstances are beyond our control, sweetheart," Nadine explained gently. "The weather isn't safe for flying. Mum wants to be here, but she has to wait until the storm passes." Kellen nodded, clearly trying to be brave, but his eyes filled with tears. "It's not the same on the computer. I wanted a real hug." Nadine pulled him close, her own eyes misting. "I know, my love, I know." That evening, as they half-heartedly continued their holiday preparations, Nadine noticed Brindle's focused attention on Kellen. The cat followed the boy from room to room, staying closer than usual, occasionally rubbing against his legs or gently headbutting his hand, small gestures of comfort that seemed deliberately offered. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold in Granville, with a crystalline blue sky that belied the stormy conditions still affecting the western states. Nadine rose early to put the turkey in the oven, determined to maintain as many traditions as possible, despite Rachel's absence. She found Kellen already awake in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a large piece of white fabric spread before him. Brindle was perched nearby, watching with intense interest. "What are you making, sweetheart?" Nadine asked. Kellen looked up, his face serious with concentration. "A special bandana for Brindle, for Thanksgiving." Using fabric markers, he was carefully drawing on the white cloth, a heart in the center, surrounded by smaller designs that Nadine recognized as their family. Stick figures representing himself, Nadine, and Rachel, with Brindle prominently featured in the middle. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely touched by the careful work. "What does it say underneath?" Kellen pointed to the wobbly letters he had written beneath the heart. "Family is where the heart is." "That's very wise," Nadine said, blinking back sudden tears. "Ms. Henderson says, 'Home is where the heart is,'" Kellen explained. "But I think family is more important than just a place. Mum isn't in our house today, but she's still family." The simple profundity of his statement caught Nadine off guard. For all his challenges with coordination and certain learning tasks, Kellen often displayed emotional wisdom beyond his years. "You're absolutely right," she agreed, sitting beside him on the floor. "Family is about connection, not location, and we're connected to Mom even when she's far away." After breakfast, they video-called Rachel, who showed them the hotel where she was staying and promised to catch the first available flight the next day. The conversation helped, but after hanging up, a certain melancholy settled over the house, a quiet acknowledgement that something essential was missing from their holiday. As Nadine continued cooking, she found herself talking more than usual to Brindle, who had stationed himself in the kitchen doorway, where he could observe both her activities and Kellen, who was setting the table with their best dishes. "It's not the same without her," Nadine confided to the cat. "The first Thanksgiving after Thomas died was hard enough, but at least Rachel was here then. She's always been here." Brindle blinked slowly at her, a gesture she had come to interpret as sympathy or understanding. By mid-afternoon, the turkey was golden brown. The potatoes were mashed and all the traditional side dishes were ready. Nadine had set the table with her grandmother's linen tablecloth and the good china that only came out for special occasions. 3 places were set, even though they knew Rachel wouldn't be using hers. "Should we set a place for Brindle?" Kellen asked, as he carefully arranged the silverware. "I think that's a lovely idea," Nadine agreed. "He's family too." Kellen beamed, adding a 4th place setting, a special cat-safe plate Nadine had purchased for Brindle's meals, positioned on a chair that had been elevated with cushions so he could reach the table if he chose to. Just as they were about to sit down to their somewhat subdued celebration, the doorbell rang. Nadine and Kellen exchanged puzzled glances. They weren't expecting visitors, and most of their neighbors would be busy with their own holiday gatherings. "I'll see who it is," Nadine said, wiping her hands on her apron. She opened the front door to find a young woman standing on their porch, shivering slightly in the November chill. She wore a puffy blue coat and had a small rolling suitcase beside her. For a moment, Nadine didn't recognize her, and then she did. "Rachel?" Her daughter smiled, tiredness and joy mingling on her face. "Surprise. But how? Your flight, the storm," Nadine stammered, pulling Rachel into a fierce hug. "I couldn't miss Thanksgiving," Rachel explained, returning the embrace. "When they cancelled my direct flight, I pieced together an alternative route, Seattle to Chicago, Chicago to Pittsburgh, then a rental car for the last 2 hours. It was a nightmare of connections, but I made it." "You drove all the way from Pittsburgh?" Nadine was astonished. "In holiday traffic." Rachel nodded, exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "I promised Kellen I'd be here for a real hug, not just a virtual one." "Mom! Mom!" Kellen's voice came from behind Nadine, rising with excitement as he recognized the visitor. He moved as quickly as his walker would allow, practically vibrating with joy. Rachel knelt to embrace him, holding him tightly as if making up for all the months of separation in one hug. "I missed you so much, buddy." "I knew you'd come," Kellen said with absolute conviction. "Brindle was acting funny all morning. He does that when something important is going to happen." Rachel looked up, meeting Nadine's eyes over Kellen's shoulder, with a look that mingled skepticism and wonder. "Is that so?" As if on cue, Brindle appeared in the doorway, observing the reunion with his characteristic focused attention. For a long moment he and Rachel regarded each other, the practical, logical software engineer and the cat who defied easy explanation. Then, to Nadine's surprise, Brindle approached Rachel directly and sat before her, golden eyes meeting hers with what seemed like deliberate communication. "Hello, Brindle," Rachel said softly. "I've heard quite a lot about you." The cat blinked slowly, then in an unprecedented gesture, gently pressed his forehead against Rachel's knee, a cat's gesture of acceptance and affection normally reserved for those they consider family. "Well," Rachel said, looking both touched and slightly unnerved, "I guess I've been officially welcomed." Their Thanksgiving dinner, delayed but now complete with all family members present, was filled with a joy that seemed all the more precious for having nearly been missed. Rachel shared stories of her life in Seattle, while Kellen proudly demonstrated how much his reading had improved since she'd left. Brindle, wearing his new bandana proclaiming, "Family is where the heart is," accepted a small portion of plain turkey on his special plate, eating with dignified appreciation before returning to his vigilant observation of their celebration. Later, as darkness fell and the dishes were cleared, they gathered in the living room. The temperature had dropped further, and Nadine had built a fire in the fireplace, the first of the season. Its warm glow created pools of golden light that emphasized the cocoon of family closeness within their walls. "So," Rachel said, settling into the armchair that had always been her favorite, "tell me more about these incidents with Brindle. Mom's told me some on the phone, but I'd like to hear everything." Kellen eagerly recounted their experiences, from the mall escalator to the bridge to the more recent, smaller interventions. As he spoke, Rachel's expression shifted gradually from polite interest to genuine curiosity, and finally to something approaching belief. "It's remarkable," she admitted when Kellen finished. "If it were just one incident, I might attribute it to coincidence, but this pattern—" She shook her head, looking at Brindle with new respect. "There's clearly something unusual happening here." "Dr. Whitman calls them sentinel cats," Nadine explained, retrieving the journal from the bookshelf. "She's documented similar cases going back nearly a century." As Rachel examined the journal, her analytical mind engaging with the mystery, Nadine felt a warmth that went beyond the physical heat of the fire. Having her daughter not just present but genuinely interested in Brindle's story felt like the closing of an important circle, the family fully united in appreciation of the remarkable being who had entered their lives. That night, long after Kellen had gone to bed, with Brindle in his customary position at the boy's feet, Nadine and Rachel sat talking in the kitchen over cups of chamomile tea. "I've been worried about you two out here alone," Rachel admitted. "Especially with Kellen's condition and your arthritis getting worse. I've even considered asking you to move to Seattle so I could help more." Nadine smiled gently. "We're managing well, and we're not alone anymore." Rachel glanced toward the stairs, where Brindle had followed Kellen. "No, I suppose you're not. It's still hard to wrap my head around. A cat that somehow senses danger and intervenes. It sounds like something from a children's book." "Life is full of mysteries science hasn't explained yet," Nadine replied. 50 years ago, who would have believed the technology you work with every day? Sometimes we need to accept the inexplicable as just another part of this extraordinary world." Rachel considered this, turning her mug between her hands. "When Dad died, you told me that love doesn't end. It just changes form. I thought it was just something people say for comfort." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But seeing Brindle, how he watches over Kellen, how he seems to understand things beyond normal perception, it makes me wonder if there's more connecting us all than we can see or measure." "Dr. Whitman believes these sentinel cats appear when and where they're needed most," Nadine said, "that they're drawn to vulnerable people who need protection. I don't know if that's true, but I do know that Brindle came into our lives at exactly the right moment." The conversation continued late into the night, mother and daughter reconnecting across the distance that had grown between them, not just the physical miles, but the emotional space that often develops when lives move in different directions. And through it all, they were aware of the silent guardian upstairs, keeping watch over the youngest and most vulnerable member of their family. The remainder of Rachel's visit passed in a blend of holiday traditions and new experiences. She accompanied them to Nadine's Sunday reading session at the library, witnessing firsthand the community that had formed around these gatherings and Brindle's role as a quiet centerpiece. She helped Kellen practice with his walker in the park, marveling at his improved confidence and coordination, and she spent hours poring over Dr. Whitman's journal and Nadine's additional entries, her analytical mind engaged by the patterns and possibilities they suggested. On her last evening before returning to Seattle, Rachel made an announcement over dinner. "I've been thinking," she said, setting down her fork with deliberate care. "My company has been talking about opening a satellite office in Columbus. It's only an hour from here." Nadine looked up, surprised. "Are you considering a transfer?" Rachel nodded. "I've already spoken with my director about it. They need someone experienced to help establish the new location. It would mean a promotion, actually." "You'd be closer to us?" Kellen asked, his face lighting up with hope. "Much closer," Rachel confirmed. "Close enough to visit every weekend if I wanted to." Later, after Kellen had gone upstairs to prepare for bed, Rachel confided the full truth to Nadine. "It's not just about being closer to you both, though that's a big part of it. It's also, I want to understand more about what's happening here, with Brindle, with these sentinel cats Dr. Whitman documented." "Your scientific curiosity is piqued," Nadine observed with a smile. "More than that," Rachel admitted. "It's made me question some of my assumptions about the world, about connection, about what we know versus what we think we know." She glanced toward the stairs, where Brindle had just appeared, watching them with his usual attentiveness. "Besides, I think he's decided I belong here too." The morning of Rachel's departure brought a crystalline frost that coated every surface with diamond-like sparkle. As they stood on the porch saying their goodbyes, Brindle positioned himself on the top step, golden eyes fixed on Rachel as if memorizing her features. "I'll be back for Christmas," she promised, kneeling to gently stroke his marbled fur. "And maybe by spring I'll be living close enough to visit whenever I want." Brindle blinked slowly at her, then pressed his forehead briefly against her hand, that same gesture of acceptance he had offered upon her arrival. As Rachel's rental car disappeared down the street, Nadine felt Kellen's small hand slip into hers. "She'll really come back soon, won't she?" "Yes," Nadine assured him, with a certainty that surprised her. "Our family is changing, growing stronger. I can feel it." Beside them, Brindle sat in perfect stillness, golden eyes fixed on the horizon where Rachel's car had vanished. Whatever mysteries he held, whatever purpose guided his remarkable awareness, one thing had become clear. He had brought more than just physical safety to their lives. He had become a catalyst for healing, for reconnection, for the strengthening of bonds that distance and time had begun to weaken. As they turned to go inside, Brindle preceding them with his characteristic quiet grace, Nadine felt a profound gratitude wash over her. For this extraordinary cat who had appeared so unexpectedly in their lives, for her grandson, whose courage and open heart continued to amaze her, for her daughter, finding her way back to them both literally and figuratively. The world was full of unseen connections, invisible threads binding heart to heart across time and space. And sometimes those connections took physical form, in a phone call at just the right moment, in a daughter driving through the night to keep a promise, in a cat with golden eyes who seemed to understand more than any animal should. Grandville was preparing for winter now, with holiday decorations appearing in shop windows and evergreen wreaths adorning doors. Soon snow would blanket the town in pristine white, transforming familiar landscapes into new wonderlands for exploration. And through it all, through winter's chill and spring's renewal, through whatever challenges lay ahead, a sentinel would be watching, silent but aware, guiding them away from hidden dangers toward the light of safety and connection. Some called it coincidence, others called it instinct. But for Nadine, Kellen, and now Rachel too, it had another name. A small miracle with paws and whiskers and eyes like polished amber, weaving its way through their lives with purpose and wisdom beyond human understanding. Because some hearts, even small ones covered in fur, know exactly where they need to be. And sometimes the paws of a cat can save more than just a life. It can remind us of what truly matters in this vast, mysterious, and wonderful world we share. The end.